In the mysterious town of Dunwich, Massachusetts, where the air is thick with an eerie atmosphere, strange creatures lurk, and the locals are plagued by dark secrets. The town's history dates back to the 17th century, with tales of witchcraft, Satan worship, and unholy rituals. The Whateleys and Bishops, two prominent families, have kept their lineage intact, but their descendants have degenerated into a state of mental and physical decay. One fateful night, a deformed albino woman, Lavinia Whateley, gave birth to a dark, goatish-looking infant, Wilbur, in a decrepit farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The child's paternity was shrouded in mystery, and the townsfolk whispered about the father's true identity. Lavinia, a recluse with a penchant for ancient lore, was proud of her child, prophesying about his extraordinary powers and future. As Wilbur grew, the townspeople began to notice strange occurrences, unexplained noises in the hills, eerie lights, and an unsettling feeling of being watched. The Whateleys' dark past and Lavinia's fascination with black magic cast a shadow over the town, making outsiders wary of visiting Dunwich. In the town of Dunwich, a mysterious family, the Whateleys, lived on Sentinel Hill. Old Zechariah Whateley and Mamie Bishop visited Wilbur, the newborn, and noticed his unusual growth. As Wilbur grew, he exhibited extraordinary strength, walked at 7 months, and began talking at 11 months with an accent unlike the locals. People avoided him due to his ugliness and strange behavior. Wilbur's grandfather, Old Whateley, continued to buy cattle, but the herd remained small. He repaired the old house, including a room for Wilbur, where he stored ancient books. The townspeople were suspicious of Old Whateley's activities, especially when he boarded up the windows and built a wooden runway to the upper floor. As Wilbur grew, he became increasingly quiet and spent most of his time reading and studying the ancient books. His presence seemed to stir up evil, and dogs would attack him on sight. The townspeople whispered about the strange noises on Sentinel Hill, which seemed to coincide with Wilbur's activities. In 1917, the government investigated the region's decadence, and reporters discovered the Whateleys' strange ways. Wilbur, now 4.5, looked like a teenager, and his voice had begun to break. The reporters sensed an eerie atmosphere at the Whateley farm, with a strange smell emanating from the sealed upper floor. For the next decade, the Whateleys continued their mysterious activities, lighting fires on Sentinel Hill and performing strange rituals. The townspeople grew accustomed to their ways, but the sense of foreboding remained. In the town of Dunwich, strange occurrences took place at the Whateley house. People heard sounds coming from the sealed upper story, and there were rumors of animal sacrifices. In 1923, Wilbur Whateley, a boy with a mature mind and appearance, and his grandfather began renovating the house, knocking out partitions and removing the attic floor. They also tore down the central chimney and fitted a flimsy stovepipe. Old Whateley believed that whippoorwills were a sign of his impending death, and he told the villagers that they would know if the birds succeeded in taking his soul. On Lammas Night, 1924, Dr. Houghton was summoned to the Whateley house, where he found Old Whateley dying. The doctor was disturbed by the chattering night birds outside, which seemed to be synchronized with the dying man's gasps. As Old Whateley lay dying, he told Wilbur to open up the gates to Yog Sothoth with a long chant and to feed it regularly. He warned Wilbur not to let it grow too fast, or it would be all over. After Old Whateley's death, Wilbur became more reclusive and was feared by the villagers. He was known to have corresponded with librarians from distant places, seeking rare and forbidden books. In 1925, a scholar from Miskatonic University visited Wilbur and departed pale and puzzled. Wilbur's height continued to increase, reaching over 7 feet tall. His mother, Lavinia, complained of being afraid of him and disappeared on Halloween night, 1926. The hill noises sounded louder than ever, and fire burned on Sentinel Hill. In 1927, Wilbur repaired 2 sheds in the farmyard and began moving his books and effects out to them. He was seen closing all the doors and windows on the ground floor, and people suspected him of knowing something about his mother's disappearance. His height continued to increase, and he became more reclusive. In the winter of 1927, Wilbur traveled to Miskatonic University to consult a copy of the Necronomicon, a forbidden book. He met with Dr. Armitage, who was shocked by Wilbur's appearance and demeanor. Wilbur sought a formula or incantation containing the name Yog-Sothoth, which he believed would unlock secrets of the universe. Dr. Armitage was horrified by the text and refused to. Dr. Armitage suspected that Wilbur Wutley, a strange and ominous figure, was connected to an ancient and malevolent force that threatened the world. Wutley's family had a dark history, and Armitage believed that his grandfather's last words held clues to the evil that lurked in the shadows. As Armitage delved deeper into the mystery, he discovered that Wutley was searching for the Necronomicon, a forbidden book that held the secrets of the ancient horror. One fateful night, the horror finally emerged. Armitage, along with Professor Warren Rice and Dr. Francis Morgan, witnessed the monstrous creature that Wutley had become. The creature was a twisted amalgamation of human and animal parts, with tentacles, a trunk-like tail, and eyes that seemed to belong to another dimension. As it lay dying, it spoke in a language that was not of this earth, uttering phrases from the Necronomicon. As the creature disintegrated, Armitage realized that Wutley's human element was minimal, and that he had taken after his unknown, otherworldly father. The true horror, however, was only just beginning. The countryside was plagued by strange noises and a growing sense of unease, and the officials who investigated Wutley's farmhouse found it to be a hub of malevolent activity. In the Miskatonic Valley, a mysterious report was filed at the courthouse in Aylesbury, sparking litigations among the Wutleys regarding airship. Meanwhile, a strange manuscript was discovered in an old bureau, written in strange characters, which was sent to Miskatonic University for study. The ancient gold paid by Wilbur and old Wutley remained undiscovered. On September 9th, a horror broke loose, accompanied by hill noises, frantic dog barking, and a peculiar stench. Luther Brown, a hired boy, rushed back to George Corey's kitchen, describing massive, round prints in the road, covered with lines spreading from one place like big palm leaf fans. The smell was awful, similar to that around Wizard Wutley's old house. As panic spread, neighbors began to share their own terrifying experiences. Chauncey, Sally Sawyer's boy, had seen old Wutley's house blown up, with tar-like stuff dripping from the edges. The yard was marked with massive, round prints leading into the meadow, where a great swath of matted-down vegetation was seen. Seth Bishop's cows were found in an awful shape, with some missing and others sucked dry of blood, bearing sores like those on Wutley's cattle. The men of Dunwich gathered to examine the monstrous prints, the maimed cattle, and the wrecked farmhouse. They suspected that something had burst loose from the Wutley ruins and gone down into cold Spring Glen. As the night fell, everyone barricaded themselves indoors, and the next day the countryside was in a panic. Two titan swaths of destruction stretched from the glen to the Fry farmyard, with monstrous prints covering the ground. The cattle were found in fragments, and those that survived had to be shot. Old Zebulon Wutley suggested performing rites on the hilltops, but his darkly wild ideas were met with skepticism. As the days passed, the horror continued to terrorize the countryside, leaving behind monstrous tracks, crushed shrubbery, and a trail of destruction. The men of Dunwich were too passive to organize a defense, and the horror remained unchecked. In Dunwich, a mysterious event occurred when people heard a frantic voice on the phone, followed by a crashing sound. The next morning, a group of armed men investigated and found that the Fry house had been destroyed, with no signs of life or death. Meanwhile, in Arkham, Dr. Armitage was trying to decipher a mysterious manuscript written by Wilbur Wutley. The manuscript was in an unknown alphabet, and Armitage suspected it was a cipher. After weeks of study, he finally cracked the code and discovered that the text was in English. The diary revealed that Wilbur Wutley was trying to summon an otherworldly entity. As Armitage read on, he became increasingly terrified and eventually collapsed from exhaustion. His colleagues, Prof. Rice and Dr. Morgan, were also horrified by the diary's contents. Together, they tried to find a way to stop the entity, but their efforts were in vain. On Wednesday, they received news that a monstrous creature had been spotted in Dunwich, and they knew they had to act fast. Armitage, Rice, and Morgan went to Dunwich to investigate the strange occurrences. They met the locals, who were terrified, and learned about the annihilation of the Elmer Fry house and family. They saw the ruins, the blasphemous tracks, and the wounded cattle. The trail on Sentinel Hill seemed significant, and they decided to seek out the state police who had come to investigate. However, the police were nowhere to be found, and the locals were perplexed. Old Sam Hutchins remembered warning the police not to go into the glen, and everyone shuddered at the thought. As night fell, Armitage, Rice, and Morgan prepared to face the horror. They knew what to expect, but the locals were unaware. The night was filled with strange noises, and the men waited anxiously. In the morning, they debated whether to wait or attack the monster. Suddenly, a group of frightened men arrived, telling them that the horror was moving again, this time in daylight. They described the sounds and smells, and how the trees were bending. Armitage decided it was time to act, and they set out to follow the monster. On Sentinel Hill, a group of men, including Armitage, Morgan, and Rice, searched for a mysterious entity. They used a telescope to scan the hillside and spotted something moving slowly up the mountain. As they watched, the entity grew larger and began to take shape. Curtis Whately, who was holding the telescope, described it as a massive, jelly-like creature with dozens of legs, bulging eyes, and multiple mouths. It had a face on top, similar to Wizard Whately's. The group was horrified and panicked. Armitage, Morgan, and Rice ascended the mountain, trying to get a better look. They used a sprayer to reveal the entity, and Curtis saw it clearly. The creature was enormous, with a face that resembled Wizard Whately's. The group heard a strange, musical sound, and the whippoorwills began to pipe wildly. As the ritual reached its climax, the sky darkened, and a rumbling sound filled the air. The entity began to speak in a voice that was not of this world, uttering words that sounded like Ignai, Yog-Sothoth. The group was paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, a lightning bolt struck the altar stone, and a massive, unseen force swept down the mountain, destroying everything in its path. The stench was overwhelming, and the vegetation turned yellow-gray. When it was all over, the Arkham men came down the mountain, shaken but relieved. They told the group that the entity had been banished back to its own realm and could never return. Curtis Whately, still reeling from what he had seen, remembered the face on top of the creature and realized it was Wizard Whately's. Old Zebulon Whately spoke up, recalling an ancient prophecy about a child of Lavany's calling its father's name on Sentinel Hill. The group was left to ponder the horror they had witnessed. Wilbur Whately was a devilish monster, and his death was a horrific sight. His diary is cursed, and I'll burn it. I warn you, destroy the altar stone and the standing stones on the hills. The Whateleys used these to summon beings that would destroy humanity and take the earth to an unknown place. The creature we just defeated was raised by the Whateleys for their evil plans. It grew rapidly, just like Wilbur, but was more powerful due to its stronger outsideness. Wilbur didn't summon it. It was his twin brother, resembling their father more than Wilbur did.